And we're on.
Okay. Hello, everyone. This is Susan Cascino, City of Boston. You've tuned into our webinar about zero waste. And I'm here with Robbie, and he's getting us organized here. I don't know, he's pressing a lot of buttons. And Amy, who's our lead consultant. And we'll do more formal introductions once we get to that slide. So I guess we're ready.
All right.
Okay. Again, I'm Susan Cascino, Recycling Policy Director for the City of Boston.
My name is Robert Barton, and I'm the Greenovate Boston Fellow.
And I'm Amy Perlmutter. I'm the lead consultant on the zero waste planning process for the City of Boston.
Nice. So today we're going to go through some different aspects of zero waste. We're going to start with a little bit of a presentation, about 25 minutes. Then I'll ask a question or two of our presenters, and then we'll turn to you, the audience. And if you have any great questions, we'll be sure to ask our presenters those as well. So anytime during the presentation, if you have a question, you can always send an email to us at greenovate@boston.gov. And another note, since we're broadcasting on YouTube, if you're having trouble hearing us, we'll try to project. But you can always adjust your volume settings on the YouTube app, or I suggest also checking your computer settings as well. Susan, why don't you start us off by telling us why we're talking about waste?
Well, waste is an important issue that impacts the quality of life for people across the City of Boston. And this webinar is part of Boston's effort to pursue zero waste as part of our climate action plan. But I think we can all agree that being wasteful is not a good thing. The amount of waste that we generate is not sustainable for the planet. And it is a waste of money and natural resources. So today, we'll explain how waste is managed in the City of Boston, the progress we've made over the last 10 years, and the benefits of zero waste. Okay, so we're going to start with some common terms in the waste industry. So waste generally is, that which is trash or rubbish, garbage. It's the stuff that you put out on the curb and hope somebody takes it away so that you don't have to look at it anymore. Also, recyclables are materials that are recycled into new things. And compost is, that's a term that's used to describe a lot of things. But I think generally compost is a natural fertilizer that is from the decomposition of living things, plants, leaves, food waste, cardboard, etc. Okay, then we have common waste practices. Waste reduction is really source reduction. That means consuming less, either through buying less or reusing that which you have via repairing it or just using it more than just one time. Another term that's used a lot, and that actually describes what is being pulled out of what we call the waste stream. And the waste stream is generally all that's made up of the materials that you're putting in your trash can. We call that a stream. When we divert materials for recycling or composting, that's what we refer to as diversion. And then single stream recycling is the practice. It's becoming the norm. It's definitely what we use here in the city for our residential recycling program, and it allows residents to put in one container.
So what we're talking about here with zero waste is a shift. And so you may have heard us use this term before in other Greenovate events and outreach. Here we're kind of, I want to take a moment to break it down for you. It's a transition from kind of a usual way of doing things where we pull things out, usually from the natural environment, we make it into something we use, and then when we're done with it, we either throw it away in a pit somewhere or we burn it. And this is a move away from that towards a different sort of mindset towards material things, towards seeing the value that something has beyond its first use. So instead of just putting together a product and throwing it out. Zero waste and pushes us to say, once one person is done with an object, then they put that back into the stream of use so that it can be made into something else. So for example, we might take some soda cans and make them into more soda cans, or we might make them into a bicycle frame, or we might make them into something else. And in this way, the material keeps getting used. We keep seeing the value that it has for us.
Okay. So, we're not starting from ground zero. We have up in this slide the milestones over the last decades, since the 1980s, when residents first organized recycling in the city, and they were volunteers and set up drop-off programs throughout the city. I think by the end of the 80s, we had probably 800 block captains and 10 drop-offs throughout the city. And at that point, we were having to sort into, I don't know, it was like about 6 or 8 different categories of recyclables. But the point at that in the late 80s with those residents was that they wanted the city to have a curbside program. So then in the 90s, we had the first citywide multi-material weekly collection program. And as you can see in the picture of the blue bin with the paper bag filled with paper, that's what was the norm, and that was a dual stream. So when the truck came and picked that up, it had a split body, so the bottles and cans and plastic went into one. That was one stream, and then one side of the body of the truck, and in the other went paper and cardboard. Then in the 2000s, we transitioned to single stream recycling, and you can see, so that blue bin was a 14-gallon bin. And when we went to single stream, we distributed to residents 64-gallon wheeled carts. So that not only increased the capacity, fourfold, it also provided convenience, more convenience. Residents could put all their recycling into one container. And then the last thing was that it was cleaner too. Everything was containerized. And our most recent milestone has been the expansion of our leaf and yard waste collections, as well as our pilot of our community compost. Now, we are looking at our developing a zero waste plan. So that is because of the climate action plan. And it has, as part of it, that the city will do a zero waste plan. That was in 2014. And in 2016, we had a summit where we invited representatives from cities that currently have zero waste plans, so that we could learn what's involved and how we could make it work in Boston. We did that. We wrote up a set of principles for the mayor, who accepted those in 2017, and also allowed us to hire a consultant team to help us develop this plan. And that's why we have Perlmutter Associates with us today. And we anticipate our plan to be, our recommendations for a plan to be completed by the end of 2018.
So something you may be wondering is way, as if they disappear somewhere once you're done with them. So Susan, can you tell us what actually happens if you live in Boston and you throw trash or recycling out? Where does it go?
Sure. So that's an important distinguish to make too. I'm going to talk about whether if you live in Boston where your trash goes, because actually the city only is responsible for the management of residential trash. So, and what happens to that is that it either goes to a transfer station in Lynn or to, which after it goes to the transfer station in Lynn, it goes to a waste to energy facility either in Haverhill or Rochester, or it goes directly to a waste energy facility in Saugus. Now, waste to energy facilities are combustion facilities. So these are places where the trash is burned to create electricity for use. So our residential trash is not landfilled. It goes to waste to energy facilities. Then our recycling, all of our residential recycling goes to Cascino Recycling, which is a material recovery facility in Charlestown, a neighborhood of Boston. And then our leaf and yard waste goes to our compost site in Mattapan.
And if you joined us for the Pumpkin Smash, you got to see the compost site in person and got to destroy your old Halloween pumpkins.
Okay, so broad picture of how waste management is handled. Actually, it's not just the city, but the city and state are responsible for waste management, and both maintain sets of regulations, plans, policies. And what's exciting for the city right now is that Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection has its solid waste master plan, which is aiming for zero waste across the state as well. So we will be taking our lead from that plan as well. So the way this zero waste planning process is structured is to look at residential waste and then as one sector, and then what we're referring to as ICI, which is industrial, commercial, and institutional waste as another sector. And that division is being made because, as I said earlier, the city has direct responsibility for its residential waste stream. And and that under the jurisdiction of the Public Works Department. So Public Works is responsible for the collection of trash, recycling, leaf and yard waste, hazardous waste. We also do drop-offs for electronic waste, paint and motor oil, textiles, etc. Anyways, in terms of actual policies that affect the city, we are affected by the Massachusetts DEP's waste bans. They regulate the solid waste facilities and do not allow recyclable materials into those solid waste facilities. So if our trash trucks go to these solid waste facilities and there's a lot of recyclables in them, they can be rejected. Those loads can be rejected. So the city does have a mandatory recycling ordinance, but it is strictly referred to owners of large residential buildings. And those buildings are 7 or more units. And then our code enforcement team, which is part of Public Works, enforces our sanitation codes. And those sanitation codes affect both the commercial and residential. It's about keeping your trash in their containers, maintaining those trash containers, etc. Additionally, for commercial, industrial, and institutional policies for the waste stream, the city requires any trash hauler to be permitted, and as part of the city commercial hauling permit, haulers are required to also provide recycling services. As I said, also the code enforcement police will monitor the commercial sector as well. Okay,
so
let's see.
Now we turn our attention to kind of like what would zero waste look like in terms of numbers, and how are we doing right now? So Susan, what are we looking at here with this graph? And
I love this graph. Okay, so this graph, well, first of all, what does zero waste mean in numbers? Well, it means that our trash would get to as close to zero as possible, which means we would be diverting trash to be recycled or composted instead. And that we would also lower the levels of waste we generate through reduction and reuse. So how we're doing, or the progress that we've made over the last 10 years is reflected in this graph. And again, this is residential waste. So Boston residents have reduced the amount of trash that they've generated over the last 10 years by 20%. We have more than doubled, Boston residents have more than doubled the amount that they put out for recycling, and have almost doubled the amount that they put out for leaf and yard waste. And that's all good news. But if we were, this dotted line in the middle, that's a 50% diversion. And if we would look at our waste composition and what our programs cover, we can achieve, or we can strive to achieve at least that 50% mark with our existing programs, and we'd like to go beyond that by diverting more materials as well.
And just something I would add really quick is just as we think about transitioning from trash generation to diversion, we would also have to think in our planning about how our collection and our infrastructure could shift as well to difference in where things would go.
Yeah, that's a good point. And often we get asked, well, how's my neighborhood doing, or how's my street doing, or so this is about as close as we can get to explaining how folks are doing. So here we have a map of Boston, and it is colored by public works districts. So the way the public works, as I said, they are responsible for the collection and recycling and disposal of our waste. And they divide the city up into 5 districts. So this is recycling, and District E is recycling the most, and it's measured by pounds per household. And District E is mostly West Roxbury and Hyde Park, with a little bit of Rosendale. And then in second place, you've got in the green, District B, and that's Alston, Brighton, and Jamaica Plain. And then C is Dorchester, and then D is East and South Boston, and District A, which is coming in last, is the most concentrated neighborhood. That's the downtown neighborhood in Roxbury. So, folks in West Roxbury and Hyde Park might be getting all excited that they're doing the best, but that's not the end of the story. You also have to look at how much waste, how much trash you're producing. So this is what this map says. So actually, and again, it's pounds per household. So this is saying that Dorchester produces the most trash per household, followed by West Roxbury, Hyde Park, District E, which also Rosendale, and then East Boston and South Boston. And as we saw, the downtown area was doing the worst in terms of recycling, but they're almost the least generator. So, and in fact, Jamaica Plain, Alston, and Brighton weren't quite the best at recyclers, but they're the lowest waste producers. So,
Susan, this is Amy. I have a question. So on this chart, does the waste generated include the recycling, or that's the waste disposed after recycling?
It's the waste disposed.
Okay, thanks.
Great, thank you, Susan. I want to take a second just to share some of the great benefits that we get from zero waste as something that will change the way that we live, work, and play in Boston. Zero waste is a win-win-win for people, for our environment, and for the local economy. It strengthens social ties, and it builds our community well-being through sharing and reuse. It nourishes our life in green space. Think about all that compost we can be producing and using to grow great things for you to eat and smell in your yard. It also has this great potential to spur jobs and innovation, especially in the fields of reuse and repair. So to give you an example, some familiar folks who do repair would be jobs like cobblers, carpenters, and electronics repair people. And there's definitely the potential to have people doing things like working in product refurbishment, working in recycling collection, and working in reuse manufacturing capacities. So Susan, can you tell us a little bit about the planning process, what that's going to look like for the city of Boston?
So the planning process is going to be guided by a zero waste plan advisory committee. And that committee is made up of representatives from a variety of businesses and institutions, as well as residents who live in one of those 5 districts, the public works sanitation districts, so that we could get a representation from all the neighborhoods. And in terms of on the commercial side, as I said, there will have industry experts as well as city agencies involved. So this advisory committee will be supported by our consultant team, who will be actually doing the research. They will be looking into what kind of waste and amounts of waste that we're generating, and then B, they'll assess what the waste reduction measures and opportunities we have, and then look at what makes the most economic sense, look at the costs versus the benefits.
And I want to throw in, since we're here with Greenovate Boston, just that we'll be here along the way as well to familiarize Bostonians with the nuts and bolts of zero waste, doing things like putting on events, writing blogs about zero waste concepts like compost, which we've been focusing on for November, and also doing tweeting and social media to help keep you up with the freshest zero waste news. So that's the end of our presentation period, and I'm going to take some time to ask a few questions that I've prepared for Amy and Susan. Again, if you have a question that you want to share and you'd like them to try on, please feel free to email us at greenovate@boston.gov. It gets to our presenters. So while I switch this over, Susan, or maybe let's go over to Amy, since
We haven't
I want to
gotten
give
it
you
yet.
a moment in the sun. Can you tell us a little more, Amy, about, from your perspective, what the planning process is going to be like for you and what you're kind of looking at with your team?
Sure. We actually just started a couple weeks ago by looking at facilities that handle Boston's waste. So we have, I'll just mention that the consulting team, as we said, I'm the lead consultant, and then we have Gary Liss and Ruth Abbey with Zero Waste Associates on the West Coast, who've written more zero waste plans than I can count. We've got the Center for Ecotechnology based in Massachusetts, who's done a lot of work and around the state on commercial and institutional waste diversion and recycling. And so we spent 4 days a couple weeks ago looking at 17 different facilities that handle Boston's recyclables and waste, and we looked at food waste diversion, we looked at reuse and repair, we looked at the materials recovery facility where the residential waste recyclables go to, and we're really trying right now to get a sense of who handles what, where does everything go, how does it get handled, are these facilities able to handle more materials? What kinds of policies would be helpful to them for the city to put in place to allow them to grow and handle more materials? And we're going to be continuing to do that. So we'll be looking at more facilities. We're gathering background information about Boston's waste generation, and not just the residential. As Susan said, we're looking at the institutional, commercial, industrial, the ICI sector. And so the first task is really getting a sense of that baseline generation and how it's handled. Then we're going to look at where are the gaps, where are the opportunities to develop more policies, programs, and facilities that could divert materials. And we're not just looking at tonnage. So we're not just looking, for example, at where are the most tons generated in Boston, and where could, what are the kinds of facilities and programs that might handle that? But we're also looking at what are the kinds of things that will help get people thinking about their waste. I live in Cambridge, and I know we've got curbside collection of organic waste, and neighbors have told me that that's gotten them thinking about the other kinds of waste that they generate and how they can reduce those wastes. So I think that that's a really important thing to be looking at, is getting people to think about how else they can reduce and recycle and divert their waste. And so then we'll be developing a list of opportunities. And as Susan said, we've got a zero waste planning committee or advisory committee. We'll be working with them. We'll be working with the community through Greenovate and through stakeholder meetings to narrow down those priorities and figure out what what are the kinds of policies, programs, and facilities that the city should pursue.
Great. Wonderful. So it sounds like you've got a lot on your plate.
Yep.
Between the two of you, I do want to ask the question I have, which is, so what are we considering? What's on the table in terms of zero waste? It's a big city. There's a lot of people. There's plenty of things we have the potential to do.
Well, that's why we're doing a plan. We want to consider everything. We want to look at all options, and we want it to be a comprehensive plan, so that we're looking at where it works in other cities, what other cities have done, and there are all sorts of examples of things. It will be through the process of having our community engaged, all the folks that could possibly be impacted by any of these measures, to have a voice in this process. All sorts of things. I mean, as Amy had mentioned, in the city of Cambridge, they've already started diverting food waste. Food waste is probably the next biggest section of our waste stream that we're looking at. Prior to this point, we haven't really had any facility that could handle, I mean, we're about 6 times the size of Cambridge. Mm-hmm. So when we look at facilities, they have to have a lot more capacity to be able to handle and that's just our residential waste. But thanks to the DEP with their, and I don't think I mentioned, but the wastebands, their most recent wasteban was their organics wasteban, and that happened in 2014, and that spurred the market to create capacity for handling food waste. So we're hoping to have that opportunity for our as well, or we will look at that.
And Susan, I can actually throw something else out related to food waste. 3 of the facilities that we visited on our massive tour, our quick in-depth tour of Boston's diversion facilities, is food rescue. And there's an amazing network of food rescue organizations in Boston that divert that food before it becomes waste. And so, are there policies that the city can put in place that would allow the generators, encourage the generators to donate more food to these organizations? And I think there's a lot of opportunity there. So that might be something else with food to keep that from becoming waste. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, reuse and are the things, some of the things that we want to follow up on is reuse opportunities, donations to organizations that reuse clothing and textiles. And, there's just, we had discussed earlier in a previous job that I had, we worked on what's called recycling market development in the state. So we looked at, provided some funding to university researchers to develop new uses for materials, and we provided some funds to communities to look at how they can link waste generation in their community with create new jobs in repair, reuse, recycling. And we funded an organization, a community development corporation in Boston, that looked at what are the kinds of medical equipment being generated by all the hospitals here. I mean, hospitals are a big sector here, and they throw out a lot of stuff. And it turns out that dental chairs are thrown out after about 6 months of use. And this organization worked with a base of constituents that had skills and had high technical skills. So they looked at how could they refurbish these dental chairs and then fix them up and resell them. And so, those are the kinds of opportunities we want to look at as well. So I think we tend to think of bottles, cans, and papers all the time, but there's so many other kinds of waste generated, and we really want to look at what are the other ways to handle that as well.
Absolutely. And that's a really great anecdote, a great way to kind of make it real for folks. I did one more question for you, Susan, before we turn to audience questions, and that was that I'd heard that the recycling markets were going to affect the way that we might plan for zero waste. So could you talk a little bit about maybe how zero waste works with recyclables and how they don't just stay in Boston, but they also go to other places?
Sure. And I think about Amy because one of the important visions or understandings that people need to have is that when they recycle and they put their recycling out on the curb, that they think they've recycled. It doesn't actually quite happen until that material has been sorted, processed, and remanufactured. So those markets are the markets for the stuff that we put out on the curb are critical to completing the recycling circle, loop, and that's also dependent on, so historically, probably in the last 20 years, a lot of our recycling has been exported to Asia, which has limited resources in terms of trees, for paper. So that was big demand, and cardboard, et cetera. I know with the Olympics in China, they were building, there was a bigger demand for recyclables, and that has recently changed because of China's interest in using its own waste and putting more limits on what they're importing, in part too because of levels of contamination. So it's important for what our facilities can take into account is that they contract with their customers, and in their contracts they specify what they can take, and that's what they know they're going to be getting, or that's what they count on in terms of their markets. So it's very important. This is an issue that is not just an issue for Boston, but for all recycling programs, that residents abide by what their community says is allowed in their recycling bin. Even if you're what's been termed a wishful recycler, and you know that old pan is metal and why can't it be recycled, it becomes problematic if people put in stuff that, particularly when markets are down, they're not, the recycling facilities aren't getting paid as much for their materials, and so they can't afford to be having to pay more to sort out the contaminants as well. So do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'll just say that a lot of these recyclables that we're putting out on the curb or taking to a recycling facility, they're commodities, and commodities always fluctuate. And I get annoyed when I see in the newspaper sometime, or hear on the radio that we're not getting paid for the recyclables and the prices have dropped and therefore it doesn't make sense to recycle. And the fact is, like any commodity, other commodities are rising and falling too. It's all about supply and demand, and it's always going to be that way. And the main reason to recycle isn't about getting the income. It's about helping the environment, helping the economy, providing materials to industry. And as Susan said, commodities have specifications. And so if they need clean, clear glass, having colored glass in there is going to be a problem. Or if they need a certain type of plastic, having other kinds of plastics in there isn't what they want. And so that's a contaminant and it lowers the value. And the best way to keep recyclables in the recycling stream is to follow the rules, follow the specifications. Don't be a wishful recycler. Make sure that the contamination is as low as possible, and then we'll have more places.
And that information on what you can recycle is on the city's website, cityofboston.gov. You can go to the recycling directory and you can just type in, glass or a pod or whatever, and it will say whether it is accepted in the cities. And again, this is for residents, whether it's accepted in the city's recycling program.
And I'll just add one more thing that as part of our planning process, we want to look at what are the kinds of what we call market development opportunities in and around Boston that we can take it, try to create or take advantage of. And so the market development really is just the end of the recycling, the repair, whatever loop. So it's diverting materials to be repaired. It's making new materials, and there might be ways that we can sort of get around that commodities issue by creating niche industries that can use small quantities of what's generated in Boston. I mean, Boston doesn't generate enough paper to make a paper mill, but maybe there is some artisan paper making that we can support that would divert more materials here. And how can we write the contracts for the residential waste in a way that we can divert some of these materials for local market development? So that's part of what we'll be looking at in the planning process as well.
Very nice. I do have a question coming in from one of our listeners, kind of on the same stream of thinking. And the question is, will the city be looking into policy or regulations to allow for regular Bostonians to bring reusable containers into grocery stores for bulk purchases and takeoff foods, similar to what we see in other countries around the world? So is that something that we've thought about before, or
I
it's on the
think it's
table?
part of everything on the table. I mean, the health regulations, health codes in the city are going to be a big part of what we look at. Or not a big part, they're going to be a part of what we look at.
Well, they're going to be a part of our discussion as well, the Boston Public Health Commission. Yeah.
Okay. Certainly something that I'd love to try out sometime. We have another question here, and it's asking about waste diversion. And the question is, as we increase the amount of waste we divert, then there's going to be a decrease in the demand for the burning of the solid waste. And this person is asking, since waste to energy generates energy, if that fits into the city's plans around alternative sources of energy. And I think Susan, you might have told me a little bit about this earlier this week. And that's that the energy from the waste to energy plants that our waste goes to doesn't actually
go directly
to
back.
Boston. So
It goes in the grid.
It goes into the grid in general. So it's not something that we're kind of responsible for. But Susan, if you have more you want to add to that.
I don't have too much more to add to that, but certainly alternative means of electric production is very much a part of what this department does, and very much a part of our climate action plan, which is also on our website. So that is definitely a consideration, because as part of our greenhouse gas emissions reduction policy.
And I'll just add that for these waste to energy facilities that burn garbage, the amount of waste is always being varied. So there's this is all spot. There's contracts, there's spot markets, and so as Boston's waste decreases, they will bring in waste from what's called, a waste shed, from a larger waste shed. So waste might come in from farther away. That they might have to lower their prices or their tipping fee, to bring waste in there. They do other things. So that's a private business that does that, and they know that communities are recycling more, and so they take that into account in their business planning.
I just want to add about the economics as well. That in our current contract, it is much cheaper to recycle those materials than to pay for their incineration. And we're hoping that that will continue, that the economics should continue to work in favor of recycling. There may be not as profit margin, but a difference in the cost as there is now, but that's certainly an incentive for us to recycle as well.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just say that the cheapest, easiest thing to recycle or burn or not burn is one that we don't generate at all. So this is why reuse and source reduction that we've been talking about today are so important to the zero waste concept and that idea of circularity and wanting to take that graph that we showed you and make it much smaller.
And let me just add on that. I'm glad you said that, because I think the goal here isn't to put as much into the recycling bin as possible. The goal is to maybe consume a little less, look at what we buy, make sure that we have durable goods that, that don't get thrown out after a minute of use, where we can do that, to think about where, there's a question from the audience came in, are there ways that people can bring their own containers to reuse for bulk and supermarkets or for takeout? So there are ways that we can reduce waste. And so the goal is, there's what's called a waste hierarchy: reduce, reuse, recycle. Recycle comes last. And so we really want to be thinking about those other parts of the hierarchy as well.
Nice. Okay, so just kind of maybe a parting question today for you two is, I'm going to go home after this, and just as a person who lives in Boston or works in Boston, what are some things that I can do in my own life to help while this planning processes go on to live more of a zero waste lifestyle?
I'm happy to tackle that. Well, as I was just saying, I think to be looking at ways that we can use less stuff. So when we go to the store, do you really need a bag? I see people put bananas in plastic bags at the supermarket. Does that really need a plastic bag? Do we, can we buy things at the store instead of maybe ordering online? I know that's not necessarily, that people might not be happy about that, but that comes with a lot of packaging. Are there, so just sort of being more conscientious about what you use.
And I've been impressed with the social media. I know in my neighborhood, we have, I'm in Jamaica Plain, and we have Buy Nothing. I get these, I think that's on Facebook. I get these pictures of things people have, and are you interested? Free Cycle's been around for a long time as well. And there's also the Swap Shop. So I think that's another creative use of the social. And we have neighborhood next door neighbors too. Yeah.
And I would also say, look at the city's website and see, because if your exposure to recycling is just putting bottles, cans, and paper in the big bin, I think it would be important to look at the city's website and see the range of other materials that can be taken. True. Can it go to a consignment? Are there, I know in my neighborhood in Cambridge, there's a teacher who's always, every couple months she sends out an email to the neighborhood saying, does anybody have, scraps of fabric or other things that she can take into teachers to use in Boston who teach art classes.
Well, and I'll just add to that too. If people who are listening know about things that we don't know about too, please let us know. And that's through they can write to the Greenovate, to that email address.
Mm-hmm. Greenovate@boston.gov.
Perfect.
Great. Well, it's been great hearing from both of you today. Thanks for tuning in, everyone out there. And we want to encourage you to keep up with us on Greenovate Boston. You can do that by following along on Twitter and Facebook at Greenovate Boston, as well as go to greenovateboston.org for all the news and updates. And after looking at this webinar today, or if you're catching the recording, we would really appreciate it if you could just take a minute or two to go to this URL, greenovateboston.org/ZW_webinar, and just tell us how it went today and what you enjoyed, and we'll look forward to hearing from you. All right, any final words, Susan or Amy, you want to share before we go?
I would love for people to sign up for the Greenovate newsletter, because that's the best way to stay informed on this zero waste process.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Thank you for mentioning that. Thanks to you both, and
Ciao.